They told me not to come to my own dad's birthday, the one I paid for, because I'd ruined the vibe. So I quietly took back everything. The venue, the vendors, even the house they all posed in. Now they're begging to be let back in, but I changed the locks. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because on this channel, we don't just tell stories, we serve justice, one betrayal at a time. If you've ever been the outsider in your own family, this story is for you. Let's begin. I never thought I'd live to see the day when my own mother would look me in the eye and tell me I wasn't welcome at my father's birthday. I wasn't some estranged child or some distant cousin. I was their eldest son. The one who stayed back when the family business collapsed, who helped pay off their mortgage when they almost lost the house, and the one who canceled my college dreams just so my siblings wouldn't miss theirs. And yet, 3 days before my father's 70th, she picked up the phone and said it, calm as a cloud, your presence would ruin the celebration. I remember that moment too well. I stood still in my living room, her words replaying over and over like a broken record. No anger in her voice, just a cold detachment. When I asked her why, she hesitated at first, then said, "You and your brother don't mix well. You always bring drama. Just this once, let it be peaceful." That was rich. My brother, Daniel, the same man who crashed my wedding proposal with a lie that destroyed my relationship. The same man who forged Dad's signature to drain our joint investment fund. And yet, I was the problem. She ended the call by saying, "We've all agreed. It's best if you don't come." All. So it wasn't just her. It was Daniel, his manipulative wife, maybe even my youngest sister who barely spoke to me after I exposed her fake nursing degree. A family of whispers and secrets. And here I was, the only one who dared to speak the truth, punished for being the inconvenient mirror they didn't want to face. I stared at the invitation I had framed weeks ago. I'd planned something special, a vintage record player Dad once mentioned, when he couldn't afford back in the 70s. I tracked it down, had it cleaned, restored, even found a signed Johnny Cash vinyl to go with it. But now, I wasn't even invited. But here's the thing about being uninvited. It sets you free to stop playing polite. It gives you clarity. And once that clarity sets in, you're not just out of the party. You're out of the role they cast you in. And that, my friend, is when the Betrayal story begins. After that call, I sat in silence for a long time. I wasn't crying. I'd run out of tears years ago. What I felt was deeper than sadness. It was a kind of calm that only comes after you finally accept that some people don't see your value until you stop giving. I looked at the gift I'd spent weeks preparing, Dad's record player, polished like new, the Johnny Cash vinyl still wrapped in its protective sleeve. I was ready to drive 6 hours just to surprise him, only to find myself locked out of a celebration I helped make possible. But I wasn't going to waste that gift. Not the money, and certainly not the message behind it. If they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, I'd show them what that actually felt like. The next morning, I made a call to the event planner they had bragged about hiring for weeks. I introduced myself politely, and the woman on the other end recognized my name instantly. "Oh, you're Michael. You're the one who paid the deposit, right?" I smiled at that. Of course, they didn't mention that part when they told me not to show up. That $2,500 deposit came straight from my account. Mom had sent me the vendor list herself a month ago, begging for help since Daniel's checks kept bouncing. I never questioned it then. Family helps family. But this time, I wasn't canceling the payment or asking for it back. I had something far more elegant in mind. I simply asked her to switch the venue. Not to cancel, not to refund, just to move the date and location to another weekend that wasn't booked. She hesitated at first, but when I reminded her of who signed the payment authorization, she agreed. "So the venue won't be available this Saturday?" she asked. "Not unless someone else books it," I said, "and feel free to release it to the public." Then I called the caterers, the decorators, the jazz band Dad loved. All services I had secretly fronted the bills for under my own name. Each one had no problem honoring my request to shift the date. I wasn't vindictive. I just made sure everything was technically still available, just not for them. I didn't stop there. I wrote a message. Not for Mom. Not even for Daniel. But for Dad, I couldn't let him think I simply didn't show up. So I printed a letter, old school style, folded it neatly, and placed it inside the vinyl sleeve of the record player. Then I couriered it directly to his office, the only space I knew he still had full control over without interference from the rest of the family. The envelope was labeled, "Play me first." Inside the note, I poured my heart. I told him everything. How I was uninvited. How I respected the decision, but also how deeply it hurt. How I had planned the gift and the evening because I still remembered how he used to hum Folsom Prison Blues every Sunday morning. I told him I loved him. But I was done being the family's invisible wallet. I ended with, "I hope the music reminds you of simpler times. Of the son who never asked for applause, only a seat at the table." Then I sent it. With the record player. With the message. With my final attempt at honoring him. Saturday came like a storm. My phone buzzed before noon. Missed calls. First from Dad. Then from the event planner. Then, finally, from Mom. I ignored them all. I knew what was happening. They had shown up at the venue, guests in tow, expecting music, food, lights, and instead found a locked building with another event being hosted inside. They called the vendors in a panic, only to discover they'd been moved to another date by the person who actually signed the checks. They had to tell the guests the party was postponed. Daniel tried to act like it was just a minor hiccup, but I heard from one of my cousins, word spread fast. People were already whispering about how Daniel never paid a dime, and how I was the real backbone of the entire evening. But the moment that mattered most? It came 2 days later. Dad showed up at my door. Alone. No cameras. No guilt-ridden entourage. Just him and a small box under his arm. When I opened the door, he didn't say a word. He stepped in, placed the box down, and opened it. Inside was the record player. Not returned. Just carried with care. He looked at me, eyes wet, and said, "I listened. I read every word. And I'm sorry, son. I didn't know. I didn't forgive him, not fully. But in that moment, I saw the man who once taught me how to tie a tie, who once cried when I broke my arm as a kid. He hugged me for a long time. And for once, I felt like the son who finally got to be seen. I thought that would be the end of it. Dad came by, we spoke, he cried. I didn't ask for much. Just acknowledgement. Just a sliver of respect for the years I'd poured into holding our family together while they pretended I was disposable. But the moment word got out that Dad had visited me alone and unprompted, the tides began to turn in ways I hadn't expected. Suddenly, I wasn't just the too serious brother or the difficult son. I became a threat to the quiet illusions they'd built around themselves, illusions where they were always the givers and I the needy burden. The next week, Mom invited me over just to talk. I shouldn't have gone, but something in me wanted to see how far the performance would go. She welcomed me in like nothing had ever happened. The same woman who said I'd ruin her husband's birthday now smiled like she was hosting a holiday brunch. The table was full of pastries and tea, all untouched. She sat me down, folded her hands, and began with the phrase I expected most, "Let's not dwell on the past." I almost laughed, but I stayed quiet, letting her spin the narrative she rehearsed. She told me they were worried about me, that I'd seemed unstable when I moved Dad's birthday plans, that I shouldn't have reacted so emotionally, that it was a family matter, not something I should have taken personally. And then, as if I hadn't been paying attention, she said, "You know, Daniel was only trying to protect the vibe. He didn't want another scene like Thanksgiving." "Another scene? You mean when I called Daniel out for lying about donating to charity, and he threw mashed potatoes at me? That scene? Apparently, I had embarrassed him and made things awkward for everyone. And once again, the blame circled back to me, the truth teller. That was the moment I realized Mom didn't want peace. She wanted silence. She wanted the illusion of a perfect family, and I was the crack in her painted porcelain. She wanted me to apologize for a wound I didn't cause. And Daniel? He wanted to keep the crown as the golden boy without ever earning it. I got up. Politely. Slowly. I told her she could keep her perfect dinners and curated photo albums. I was done posing as someone they could gaslight into compliance. And as I walked out, she called after me, Don't make this harder than it needs to be." But I was already gone. That evening, Dad called again. This time, not to cry, but to confess. He admitted something I didn't expect. For the past year, he'd known Daniel was skimming money from the family trust. Not a huge amount at once, but enough that Dad started noticing discrepancies in their statements. When he confronted him, Daniel blamed me. Said I'd been borrowing without permission. Said I used the money to fund some fantasy project. And Dad, for a time, believed him. Because I had once mentioned a dream of starting a consultancy. He never asked. He just assumed. And now he realized Daniel had manipulated both him and Mom for years. He said, "I came to you because the record player wasn't just a gift. It was a reminder of who you are. You don't scream. You don't steal. You speak through actions." And then, the shocker, I've changed the trustees. Effective immediately, you're listed as the sole custodian of my medical and financial affairs. I've lost too much time not listening to the son who actually showed up. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt vindicated, but a bigger part just felt tired. Tired of fighting for space in a family that used love as a weapon. What happened next wasn't my doing, not directly. Word got out to the rest of the family. Daniel lost it. He stormed into Dad's office, demanding an explanation. I wasn't there, but Dad told me later. He stood up, pointed to the door, and said, "If you lie once more, you're out of this family for good." Daniel left, humiliated. His wife, who once smirked at me across every dinner table, started calling me in tears, begging to explain. I blocked the number. There was nothing left to explain. Mom didn't speak to me for 3 weeks after that. But then she did what she always did, threw a dinner party to reclaim control. Invited everyone. All the cousins. The distant relatives. And yes, even me. Only this time, I didn't decline. I accepted, but on my terms. I showed up exactly 20 minutes late, in a tailored suit, with a bottle of wine from the year I graduated college, the year they didn't attend my ceremony because Daniel had a fever. I walked in, handed Dad the wine, nodded to the guests, and sat down like I had never left. The whispers started almost immediately. People knew. They always knew, but they finally had a reason to say it out loud. "Michael's the one keeping that house together," one aunt whispered. "He was never the problem," said another. And as the evening rolled on, I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just existed. And for once, they had to deal with the weight of my presence. Not as the forgotten son, not as the silent wallet, but as the man who didn't need their permission to belong. 2 months passed. On the surface, things looked normal again. I kept my distance, Dad and I spoke more often, and Daniel, well, Daniel had vanished from family gatherings entirely. He'd resigned from his position at the small finance firm he'd been bragging about for years. Turns out, he wasn't just skimming from the family trust. He had been leveraging Dad's name as a guarantor on private loans. And when those payments started defaulting, the phone calls began. First to him, then to Dad. Then, when they got no answers, to me, because my name was now on all legal and financial documentation related to the estate. The first time I picked up one of those calls, it was from a bank I'd never heard of. They asked if I was prepared to settle the outstanding obligations of the Graham family guarantee. The number made my stomach turn, $218,000. I told them to send me the documents. I stayed calm. I didn't panic, because I already knew what this was. The final fallout of years of being overlooked while Daniel played emperor with borrowed gold. I went over the paperwork like a surgeon. Daniel had forged signatures. Not just once, but multiple times. And he didn't even try to make them look different. It was sloppy, arrogant fraud, built on the assumption that no one would ever question the golden son. When I showed the documents to Dad, his face went pale. He didn't speak for nearly 5 minutes. Then he whispered. I gave him every chance to come clean. He looked older in that moment than I'd ever seen him, like something in him had finally cracked for good. We had a lawyer draft a statement and forwarded everything to the family's legal advisor. There was no yelling, no dramatic confrontation, just silence, paperwork, and the sound of pride dissolving under pressure. Dad filed to separate all remaining assets from Daniel's access. Mom, for once, didn't argue. She just sat at the table with a blank stare, her nails tapping rhythmically on her coffee mug like she was counting regrets. And then came the big one. A week later, Mom called. It was just after 9 p.m. Her voice was shaking. "Michael, they're foreclosing on the house." I paused, not because I was surprised, but because I was waiting for her to admit the second half. "Daniel took a second mortgage," she finally said, without telling us. "We didn't know until the notice came in today." I closed my eyes and took a breath. That house, my childhood home, had been in the family for nearly 50 years. And now it was hanging by a thread because of one man's unchecked ego. "We need help," she whispered. Those words should have felt satisfying. Should have felt like the high point of a story where the villain finally crumbles. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt cold, not cruel, just resolved. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence hang between us until she added, "I know we treated you unfairly. I know. I see it now. But we're desperate, Michael. And you're the only one who can fix this." That's when I knew they didn't want reconciliation. They wanted rescue. I told her I'd think about it, that I'd call back in a few days. And during that time, I did think. I thought about the birthdays I spent alone, the holidays I skipped because I couldn't fake a smile in a room full of people who saw me as an ATM with a pulse. I thought about how I was blamed for every disruption while Daniel lit the match and watched me burn. I thought about how they turned my silence into guilt, my generosity into obligation. And finally, I thought about what real justice would look like, not petty revenge, but lasting correction. So when I called her back, I gave her an offer. "I'll pay off the debt," I said, "but the house will be signed over to me. Entirely. And you'll stay in it, rent-free, with Dad. But Daniel is never to set foot on that property again. If he does, you'll be evicted within 24 hours. Non-negotiable." There was a long pause. Then, the faintest sob. "You're serious?" she said. "Dead serious," I replied. She agreed. The legal transfer took 2 weeks. I cleared the debt in one transaction, a wire transfer that didn't just settle accounts, it shifted power. I didn't tell anyone in the extended family. I didn't post about it. I didn't brag. But they found out anyway. At the next family gathering, they shook my hand with newfound respect, offering congratulations they never would have given if things hadn't collapsed first. But I didn't care about their recognition. I only cared that the house was safe, and that Daniel, for once, had no back door left to crawl through. Dad, to his credit, thanked me with tears in his eyes and a handwritten note he slipped into my pocket when we hugged. Mom stayed quieter after that. Less proud. More careful. Like someone who had been handed a mirror and finally looked too long. As for Daniel, he called once. Left a voicemail. Said he was in a dark place and needed family now more than ever. I deleted it without listening to the rest. Sometimes, the most merciful thing you can do is let someone sit in the silence they created. Let me know when you're ready for Chapter 5, where Daniel makes one last attempt to claw his way back by exposing a family secret he thinks will destroy the protagonist, but it backfires in a way that silences him for good. Just when I thought Daniel had finally faded into the silence he earned, he returned, louder than ever. It started with whispers again. A cousin messaged me late one evening, asking if it was true what Daniel said about the trust. Another text followed from a former family friend who hadn't reached out in years, asking if I was in trouble. The messages were vague but filled with the kind of nosy undertone people use when they're hoping to witness someone fall from grace. I didn't react right away, but I knew what was happening. Daniel was grasping for a rope he had already burned. A few days later, I got an email, anonymous, of course. It contained a PDF attachment with what looked like scanned bank transfers from 10 years ago. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then it clicked. They were old records from the account Dad had opened in my name when I turned 18. I remembered those days clearly. Back when I was working odd jobs, saving up for college, and helping pay down the family's utility bills. But what Daniel had done was twist those same documents to make it look like I'd been funneling money from the family trust into my personal account for years. The problem for Daniel was simple. I keep receipts, literally and figuratively. Every cent I ever received from that trust was documented, categorized, and spent either on family debts or essential expenses. Unlike Daniel, I never had the luxury of reckless spending. I had responsibilities. So I didn't panic. I smiled. Because this wasn't just desperation, it was projection. He thought that if he painted me as a thief, he'd somehow clean the mess he made. But he underestimated how little I had left to lose, and how much I now controlled. 2 days later, he made it public. He posted a long-winded Facebook update, tagging relatives, mutual friends, even old coworkers. He wrote about misplaced trust, how I had betrayed the family, and claimed that the only reason the house had been transferred to me was because I had manipulated Dad during his weakened state. He attached cropped screenshots, highlighted bank numbers with no context, and ended the post with a smug line. I stayed silent for years out of love, but I can't let injustice continue. Within an hour, people were commenting, sharing, speculating. And Daniel thought he'd won. But here's the thing about lies. They collapse under scrutiny. And I was prepared to bury this one with precision. That night, I called a family meeting, not online, not on social media, but in person, at my home. Dad was the first to arrive, followed by Mom, her expression tight and unreadable. Then came the others, cousins, uncles, people who had once sided with Daniel simply because it was easier. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the table. I simply handed out folders, one by one, each labeled with a name, each filled with copies of real bank statements, email chains, voice recordings, and notarized affidavits from vendors and legal advisors, documenting every transfer, every payment I had made, and every lie Daniel had told since he started borrowing against the family name. The room was dead silent. Then, to finish it, I played a recording, one Daniel had foolishly left on my voicemail weeks earlier. The one where he said, "You were always the favorite. I had to take what I could before they handed everything to you anyway." That single line, spoken in his voice, ended the debate. Dad stood up, walked to the middle of the room, and made a quiet, devastating declaration. "From this day forward, I want it known. Michael is the only son I trust. The rest is noise." Daniel tried to call that night. I didn't answer. He left a single, pathetic message. "You think you're clean? You think you're better than me? You just know how to hide better." But even his tone had changed. He didn't sound angry anymore. He sounded defeated, like a gambler who bid his last chip and watched it fall through a hole in the table. And here's the irony. I didn't need to ruin Daniel. He did that himself. I just gave him a stage and let the spotlight burn. After that night, no one questioned me again. The phone calls stopped. The side eyes at family gatherings faded. Even Mom, though she never apologized outright, began to treat me differently. She started asking questions instead of giving orders. Dad called more often, not to beg for help, but just to talk. It was quiet. It was peaceful. And most of all, it was earned. As for Daniel, last I heard, he moved out of state. Word is he's working at a low-level finance job, using a different last name. Every now and then, someone mentions his name in passing, but no one lingers. His story became a cautionary tale. And me? I stopped needing their approval. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't ruining someone. It's building something so solid, so untouchable, that no one can tear it down again. Time passed quietly after Daniel's collapse. It wasn't silence born from denial or awkwardness anymore. It was the kind that comes after a storm, when everything has been stripped bare and you're left with what truly matters. Dad and I spoke often, and even though he never used the word sorry again, I saw it in every conversation. And every time he asked for my opinion first. In the way he smiled when I spoke. We had both been reshaped, him by regret, me by resilience. And maybe that's what healing really looks like. Not a perfect ending, but an honest one. Mom changed too, though in quieter ways. She stopped hosting. Her Facebook posts became less about how perfect the family was and more about her garden or quiet days spent reading. It was like she finally understood that appearances don't save you when the people behind them are drowning. Every now and then, she would call, asking how I was, sometimes even offering to drop off food. Something she hadn't done since I was a teenager. I didn't let my guard down completely, but I let the walls soften, just enough to feel the warmth without forgetting the burn. One day, Dad sat me down and said he wanted to update his will again. Not because I owe you, he said, but because I see you now. I see who actually shows up, who actually cares. He handed me the document without ceremony. I didn't open it in front of him. I didn't need to. Because the truth is, I hadn't done any of this for inheritance. I had done it because I refused to be erased by the very people I sacrificed for. And I had proven, once and for all, that I didn't need their permission to stand tall in my own family. But there was still one thing left, one final act, not of vengeance, but of closure. I decided to host a dinner. My dinner. At the old house, my house now. I had the place repainted, cleaned, and lit with soft warm bulbs like Dad always loved. I hired a private chef, sent out formal invites, told everyone it was a small gathering, no drama, no speeches, just a family meal. People were curious. Some were hesitant, but they came. Even Mom. Even the relatives who once stood by Daniel with crossed arms and judgmental eyes. They came because they knew the winds had changed, and they wanted to be there when I made the final move. After the last plate was cleared, I stood up. No microphone, no spotlight. Just me and the truth they'd all tried to bend for years. I want to thank you all for coming, I began. This house holds a lot of memories. Some good, some painful. And while the walls may look the same, the foundation has changed. It had to, because for years, I was told I didn't belong at the table I helped set. I was told I was too serious, too different, too much. But the truth is, I was just inconvenient to the story everyone else wanted to believe. There were no interruptions. Just stillness. I continued. This home is no longer a stage for lies. It's a place for truth. For those who show up. For those who carry the weight without asking for applause. And from today forward, let it be known, family is not defined by DNA. It's defined by integrity. I raised my glass. To new beginnings. Some raised theirs back. Others stared at their laps. But I didn't care. Because for once, I wasn't waiting for applause. I had already won the only thing that mattered, clarity. That night, after everyone left, I stood in the hallway, looking at an old photo of me and Dad when I was a boy. I was holding his hand, grinning, looking up like he was invincible. For years, I chased that version of him, hoping he'd see that same light in me. Maybe he never would fully. Maybe some parts of the damage were too deep to undo. But I no longer needed his validation to feel worthy. I had built my own foundation, one they couldn't take. One that would stand long after the noise faded. As for Daniel, I don't know where he is anymore. Last I heard, he was in a different state, working under a new name. I don't hate him. I don't wish him harm. I just hope he's sitting with the silence he created, finally learning that legacy is earned, not inherited. In the end, I didn't burn bridges. I built a house on the ashes of old ones and locked the door behind me. If this story struck a nerve, if you've ever been treated like the extra piece at your own table, then remember this. You don't need their seat when you can build your own home. Subscribe for more real, emotional, and powerful stories where the underdog rises, not through revenge, but through transformation. Leave a comment if you've ever had to walk away to protect your peace. And remember, respect isn't requested. It's required.